Good day, everyone. We're very happy to welcome you into today's session, where we'll explore the complexities of scaling a global workforce, the challenges of compliant and timely payroll across multiple currencies, and the integrated people and payment strategies that help HR and finance leaders drive engagement, retention, and sustainable growth. My name is Alexia, and I'm representing Connect Global Group. Today's webinar is made possible thanks to our esteemed partners at HiBob and Papaya Global, and we couldn't be more grateful for their support. Now, before we begin, I'd like to quickly cover some essential housekeeping points. You'll find a range of interactive widgets at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to customize them to suit your viewing needs. If you have any questions during this session, please send them through at any time. If we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email to ensure your question is addressed in full. Also, keep an eye out for the webinar recording, which will be sent to you shortly via email after the event concludes. On that note, I'll pass it over to Dan, who will be helping us moderate today's discussion. Dan, over to you.
Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're tackling one of the most important conversations happening in business right now. How can HR and finance come together and create a single agile workforce strategy? Scaling a business globally brings incredible opportunities, but also complexity. Multiple countries, compliance requirements, different pay and benefit structures, and employee expectations that have never been higher. So when HR and finance aren't aligned, the result is friction, payroll headaches, and poor employee experience. But when they are aligned, they unlock speed, trust, and the ability to scale confidently. I'm joined today by three brilliant guests. Oiku from the South Pole, not the South Pole, but the company South Pole, Robert from Papaya Global, and Alex from HiBob, all of whom bring hands-on experience helping companies scale globally while keeping people experience front and center. Allow me to make the proper introductions, if I may. So Oiku has spent more than 15 years shaping HR strategy across local, regional, and global roles. At South Pole, she leads people operations worldwide and supports leaders across EMEA. She's passionate about building agile, resilient workforces, driving cultural change, and making sure HR is a true partner to the business. Oiku, if you'd like to say hello.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the introduction. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this credible professionals that we are going to have at the discussion for.
Great. Thank you, Oiku. Robert leads global sales at Papaya Global, helping companies hire, manage, and pay their teams in over 100 countries. With 15 years and more in HR tech and SaaS, Robert is something of a guru when it comes to workforce and payment solutions that take the pain out of global expansion. Robert.
Dan, thank you. Hi, Robert here, and really appreciating the opportunity to have this conversation today with the panelists and the broader audience. So glad to be here.
Great, thank you, Robert. And last but by no means least, Alex. Alex is the senior people and culture partner at HiBob and has seen the company grow quite significantly from just 75 people to over 1,300 worldwide. After 7 years in London, she's now based in Lisbon, helping to shape the employee experience across Europe and build cultures where people and business thrive. Alex.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Welcome all three of you. Okay, let's dive straight in. I'm going to start with looking at companies as they scale globally and what are the biggest challenges you see HR and finance leaders? What do they face when they're trying to manage a global workforce effectively? Oiku, you've lived this in your own organization. What stands out for you?
Yes, definitely, Dan. And I think this is a great question to set the scene to our discussions today. I think the challenge of scaling the workforce globally is not just the one, but multifaceted. While the opportunities are pain, so is the pain points. From my experience, the biggest challenge HR and finance leaders face today fall into three categories, maybe I can say: fragmented systems, the global compliance, and kind of the traditional divide between the HR and finance function, in my opinion. To start with the fragmented systems, we see that many organizations start their global journey by adding individual country-specific systems, local providers here and there, and the spreadsheets all over the place, which very quickly creates a nightmare of fragmented data where you end up with no single source of truth, but several things that not really makes any sense of. And HR has, for instance, one set of employee data, finance has another for payroll, while local managers team has a third one, which most of the time we all know that the figures never match up. And this leads to a constant manual data entry, inevitable errors, and a complete lack of real-time visibility. I feel like it's driving a car, but you have different dashboards for every country or every city you are entering, which you cannot see the full picture, and it's bound that you are going to get lost. It wastes your time and your resources, energy, but also it introduces significant operational and business risks at the same time for the company. I think this is one of the major challenges that we are facing as HR and finance professionals. The second one is the immense challenge of the global compliance. This goes even far beyond paying people on time, actually, because we are talking about a constantly shifting landscape of labor law, tax regulations, social security contributions, data privacy rules like GDPR, and unfortunately, I can be the real example to this one because South Pole operates in more than 27 countries, and what you are implementing in one country doesn't really all the time resonates with the other one, and you need to be on top of it, which is also not really realistic and feasible most of the time. This compliance rules vary, as I mentioned, from one country to other. It changes in a moment of time. And for organizations to manually keep up to this, that is not only just time consuming, but as I mentioned, not feasible, incredibly risky, exposing us to potential fines, legal battles, and also reputational damage, and also a full-time job for one person just to stay on top of all of these. And finally, there is the long-standing divide between the finance and HR teams. And we all know these teams are traditionally have very different missions, very different visions for the future of the company and the priorities. HR is more focused on people, culture, engagement, overall the employee experience, while finance's priorities are cost efficiency, financial accuracy, and compliance. But when you are scaling globally, these two functions has to be hand in hand, like a lockstep working, and operate. Unfortunately, they most of the time operate in silos. That is also what we are seeing most of the time. This also causes delays, stress for the teams, delivers also not so good experience to the employees, especially the new ones. They might have a delay payslip not being paid on time, and this friction undermines the overall global growth of the company and where it has to enable the business run. And to sum up, ultimately solving these three challenges, which I indicated, like fragmented systems, global compliance, complexity, and the HR finance divide, it's really crucial and critical to build a truly agile and scalable global workforce, which the key to successfully navigating these challenges is moving from chaos to cohesion, in my opinion, and the right systems actually what makes this transformation possible. So as a user both of Papaya and HiBob in South Pole, I can say that it becomes crucial and essential to have these unified solutions to navigate these challenges as HR and finance professionals.
Mr. Very thorough. Thank you, Oike. Really appreciate that. And continuing from there, Robert, from your vantage point working with enterprises globally, what do you see most often?
Yeah, and I think first of all, Okyu gave a very thorough answer, and she covered quite a lot of items that I think from our side we also see. So I think no better way to hear that directly from someone in that seat. But yeah, what we see is very similar. Is that when companies scale their global workforce globally, the complexity really explodes, and that's sometimes very difficult. I'm thinking about multi-currency payouts in different jurisdictions, the shifting tax regulations, specifically when you're looking at the growth of independent contractor populations around the globe. And that again comes with, for example, how do you work with different worker classification, role vetting, taking into consideration the legislation that ties into that. In Europe, we deal with labor leasing countries when you're talking about the utilization of external workforce. Again, there's a lot of different mechanisms that come into play. So from
Robert,
Papaya's
if
side,
I can jump in, labor
yeah.
leasing, that's an interesting term. What does that mean?
Sorry, just repeat that.
Was it labor leasing that you spoke about?
Yeah, so from a labor leasing perspective, is from a legislation point of view, it restricts organizations to have tri-party structures
Okay.
where you ultimately have a middle party between the employee and ultimately the
Okay.
end client. And I think that when we're looking at the global workforce from a contingent perspective,
Mhm.
there's a lot of ambiguity around who holds the commercial agreement and who holds the employment agreement or the contractor agreement. And that's really important to have visibility of when you're looking at expanding into new markets. So I hope that gives a bit of clarity on that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So yeah, that's very complex and hard to scale. And I think one of the things that we see most is enterprise organizations trying to understand how do we do that globally with systems that support us globally, but still have that embedded local support. And that's really important from our side. And I think again, tying into what Okyu said on the HR side, you really see that is focused on the employee experience, and finance is really talking about, but what is cost and what is compliance like, and running that on disconnected systems can cause some issues down the line. And I think that that misalignment can also result in errors in the last mile of payroll or paying a global workforce. And we from our side really want to make sure that that can be done paid. People can be paid accurately, compliantly, and on time. And that is really where I think we play a crucial role in managing some of those conversations.
Very good. And Alex, over to you. What resonates most with you from a people and culture perspective?
Yeah, I think there's so many good things in here resonating in general. I think you've all echoed the same sentiment that global workforce is super complex. The exactly like you've shared the taxes, the benefits, having people spread around the world. I definitely think one of the things that we see and also experience ourselves in HiBob is when you're scaling globally, having different teams all around the world. Quite often, HR teams can be small or finance teams can be small. I think particularly for smaller companies that scale and grow very quickly, you might just be relying on a few team members who are suddenly supposed to be experts in all of these different rules and requirements. That's super complex, and I think it can put a lot of pressure on those teams, especially when they're maybe looking at different data sets or leaning on different information. So actually, I think as you scale in those teams, you really rely on
Mhm.
local expertise and feeling confident that you're getting things right for your employees and for the business. So I think that, and then as you scale, let's say you're scaling quickly across companies and those teams are able to grow, then you have more stakeholders. You have a bigger finance team, you have a bigger HR team, payroll, tax, all of the different legal even all of the different teams that get involved in or need to be involved in scaling globally. I think that just adds complexity to something that already feels pretty complex.
Mhm.
And like you've both shared, I think we're definitely balancing. I think some of those things can quite often feel stereotypical of us in HR or in finance and the things that we care about. So I hope as we go through this conversation, it gives us a bit of an opportunity to talk about how there's more common ground than we might think there is.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And just pulling a thread on something that Robert said, if that's a phrase that Robert used, about the last mile of payroll, which I think for this context, we mean the payment part. So often being the biggest pain point for both finance and employees. I mean, Alex, from your perspective, what's your insights or experience been, particularly having seen that kind of scaling at HiBob?
Yeah, it's the dreaded payroll deadlines, isn't it? I guess that we want to tap into. Um, I think that always feels like such a heightened part of the process where it can create pressure for finance or HR teams. And I think Oku shared an excellent example when she was summarizing the challenges that payroll and processing payments for our employees is really the foundation of what we're doing. It creates a foundation of trust and reliability for us as a business. So I think in HR and finance, it's definitely one of the things that we share, that we want to get that right and we don't want to be risking mistakes. And I think there can be a huge impact there for if we're seeing mistakes or inefficiencies, or it can cause such an impact for employees at their level, but also on the business for reputation or risk or exposure, like you mentioned, Doku. So I think that, yeah, it gives us a little bit of pressure at the end of our payroll cycles, which I think everyone in HR and finance would like to see eased.
Yes, please. Yes, please. And just before we move on from this, Robert, I know this is a space that you know inside out.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I couldn't agree more that obviously the last mile can cause stress, specifically if you're talking about, how companies underestimate how fragmented that part actually is, from payroll to payments. And I mean, at the end of the day, even if payroll files or contractor invoices are accurate, each country rails, the cutoff times, and the compliant rules for payments work differently. And if you don't have an embedded payment infrastructure, it will be very difficult to keep control of that process. And that's when you see when finance often ends up firefighting on bank files instead of focusing on, long-term strategy and other priorities that they have. And that's where the last mile is so important, because companies continue to rely on third-party payment providers outside of their, for example, payroll service provider or HRIS. And when you're looking at manual transfers, it always requires manual intervention. So when you're looking at automating your entire payroll process, stripping the payments part from that process in particular really breaks the automation, but ultimately also the liability and compliance that companies are looking for. So I think that's really important. I mean, recently, when we were talking to, a prospective customer, they were talking about a rollout that they've did before for a payroll solution across 21 different countries, and the payroll files and the bank files were all correctly processed and uploaded to the incumbent supplier that they had. But because they didn't have an integrated part of their payroll process that actually looked after the payments, they still had in 3 different countries the late payments to the employees. And that impacts hundreds of employees at the same time and causes quite a bit of disruption. And again, payments are transactional, but from an employee perspective, it's personal. And that's really important, I think, when we look at the payments as part of the payroll process.
Yes, and as Oiku was saying at the very beginning as well, the risk there of reputational damage, it really does erode the trust if payroll is missed entirely in particular, but if it's wrong, if people are underpaid or frankly overpaid, that trust really does disappear. So we're already working towards it. So let's talk about solutions, because there's a growing shift clearly away from one size fits all platforms. Many organizations, let's be honest, turn to all-in-one platforms for simplicity, and we all understand why that would be. But why do best-of-breed systems like HiBob for people data, Papaya for payments, why do they often outperform them when it comes to scaling global workforce operations? Oichu, do you want to pick up from here?
Yeah. As you mentioned then, like unfortunately in these kinds of situations, especially when you are scaling up globally, as I mentioned, first you have like country-based, very local solutions. Then you say, I need to do a global scaling up. I need to align on my systems, and you go for all-in-one platform for the perceived simplicity, single vendor, single system, which on the surface really looks logical. One platform that you can manage everything from payroll data to HRIS system and any other thing that comes in between. But when it comes to the complexities that we just mentioned for scaling a global first workforce, most of the time it falls short. And first, it's a broad-based skills set that you can see in these kinds of systems, but unfortunately, the expertise level is also on the surface base. So you cannot really have the expertise you think that you are surrounding yourself with is not actually coming with that. And the other things that we just mentioned, like the compliance components, sometimes is very generic and lack of the deep and specialized functionality that you actually need. Because as Alexi mentioned, you have small teams that trying to manage very other jurisdictions than they are used to or they know about. And from my experience, I can also tell that most of these systems are built on often one primary market in mind, but adapting to them to other legal and financial requirements can be a major exercise to work around and manually process. So basically what I'm trying to say is this rigidity slows down the growth, increases the risk of non-compliance, and ultimately hinders the very first promise it has in the first place, which is simplicity. What I think organization needs is to surround themselves with not too many, but to a balanced provider number that has that expertise, that cutting edge and high caliber systems that outperforms and that works seamlessly, as Robert mentioned, the integrations, APIs. In South Pole, even when we joined, we had HiBob in place, but we didn't have a global payroll provider, and we transitioned to Papaya phase by phase. And when I was project managing that integration, one of the learnings I have and talk to my team and give feedback is not having the integration between HiBob and Papaya as soon as we did the transition, because it tremendously decreased our administrative work task from an HR perspective. And also from a finance perspective, the reconciliations, the general ledgers, all of those reportings also saved a lot of time. So that is one of the things that I really appreciate, the integration of HiBob and Papaya in the first place. And because they are both experts in their sides, which are specialized and deeply integrated platforms, where HiBob, we are using, for instance, the talent module, the performance module, the workforce planning module, apart from just the data capturing part. And for Papaya, apart from the payroll and payments, we are also using the reporting part, which is also very crucial, as we are all going through the next year's budget process to see the accurate data, and based on that, do the estimations and forecast for the next year. So basically, both of the systems are purpose-built to navigate the complexity, the global payroll and payments, and where ensures the accuracy, compliance, and also speed, because obviously both HR and finance, I think we are functions that nobody actually thanks you because they are paid on time at the end of the month. But the frustration and the problem and the breach in the building trust happens when there's a friction in there, which you cannot bear to have.
Yes.
So these expert systems help you to build that and move on and cultivate for the next step, instead of just doing the admin stuff that you want your employees to be getting things done what they are really paid for.
Yeah. Yes. And Robert, your perspective.
Yeah, and I think adding to what Oki just said, when you're talking about best of breed and really going into systems that don't compromise on depth when it comes to the service delivery, what I find is that when I look at our customer base, and Southpole obviously being one of those organizations, the requirements as you scale globally still differ from one another. So it means that you would have a country in which you, for example, require 5 EOR workers, which is a small headcount for a particular jurisdiction. So you want an in-country support system that is geared towards that type of headcount, that type of requirement from a legislative point of view, where in another country you might have 500 to 1,000 payroll workers, and the support that you need in that country in local language, local time zone, and really having people who understand that localization, that localized requirement. I think that is what makes the difference between having, for example, a all-in-one system that, as Oki said, really operates on the surface versus best of breed, and having, I would say, a set of different suppliers who, through integration, really make sure that it's a seamless process and that the handoff from one system to the other is exactly that, seamless. And we facilitate it in different ways. And it's really important that both from a worker experience, worker onboarding, but also from a hiring manager experience, that they don't feel that the administrative burden increases because their organization decides to use different systems, but that they still feel that the efficiency gain that they have through that is on a very high level. And that's where I believe the strength comes in with best of breed, is making sure that you have that in-depth service in areas where you seek that compliance, efficiency, and ultimately that peace of mind, but knowing that the ecosystem in which they operate is very well integrated with one another.
Agreed, agreed. And Alex, I want to come to you on this next point because we talk about best of breed approach. From your perspective, and you've seen this firsthand, what difference does it make? How does it allow HR and finance to align more closely while, I mean, let's be honest, still focusing on their core priorities as well, people experience versus operational accuracy and so on. Again, you've seen it firsthand. What difference does it make?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we talked a little bit about the difference in what HR or finance are looking at or prioritize. And I think that's where we see, going back to the question about the challenges that we're facing, like I think that's really where we can see the friction coming up. So actually this opportunity to tap into the depth that best of breed can offer, and I think improve some of that efficiency. It's helping us to be able to trust the data that we're using. If we can build systems and remove spreadsheets and going back and forth and all of these different manual steps that might be involved in a process. I think if we can be building systems and processes that are actually helping us to reduce some of those friction points, then actually we have teams across the business that feel confident they can rely on the data
Yeah.
that's in there. It's reducing some of the duplications that are involved in processes like this. And like Robert was saying, all of that those manual steps and the human touch points, I think they're parts in the process that we can actually reduce and not lean on so much, so
Yeah.
that actually we can be thinking about, where are there better opportunities to collaborate in other areas rather than getting so bogged down with the operational burden of them.
Completely agree. And this is where the rubber really hits the road. What can HR and finance teams actually do differently tomorrow? So Alex, whilst you've got the floor, if it's okay, I'm curious, how can shared data standards between HR and finance really eliminate, reconciliation issues and improve workforce visibility? What's worked for you? What have you seen that works really, really well?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few, I guess, like broader
Mhm.
topics. We're talking a lot about data and accuracy. So I think being able to have shared language between HR and finance in the way that we're understanding the information and the data that we look after, especially when we have talked about different viewpoints or different priorities. I think the context between the two teams is really, really important, helping us understand like what is it that we're looking at. So I think I guess the definitions and understanding the data that we're looking at, And the insights that we get around that as well. I think it gives us the ability to be able to understand our workforce, understand our organization and our people, and the impact that that has on finance. I think actually a lot of the time, we're talking about some of the differences and that finance teams are the ones that care about cost and compliance. Actually, I think those are really critical for HR teams as well. Actually, HR, maybe we're talking about it in a slightly different way, but actually they're really critical. So I think the more that we can come together on what that means, and what it is that we're looking at, actually, that means we have better opportunities to forecast about our workforce, make smart decisions as we scale globally, understand what it is that we're trying to do as an organization. So I think it's starting to tap more into the strategy side of things as well.
Yes. Yes, agreed. And I want to open this one up to the three of you. I mean, if from the perspective of companies that are expanding faster and wanting to do that with more confidence and so on, if you consider like a country launch playbook, what would some of the key elements be as you build that particular playbook?
Good.
Robert, I'll pick on you
Yeah,
first.
no, 100%. And I think just, quickly reflecting on the previous question as well, on the data side. Alex mentioned something that I thought was very valuable, from a data perspective. Orki and I had a conversation recently where he said it's so important to enable people to be in a place where they can spend more time on interpreting data as opposed to putting in and going through the process of manual data. And I think that both from HiBob's perspective and Papaya's perspective, we're doing a lot of work to make sure that that is happening for both finance and HR professionals. And I'm thinking about the EU directive for, payment transparency that is, coming into play at this moment in time. And that, for example, both for finance professionals and for HR professionals is data that they would want to spend more time on and understanding that. So I think that was just a point of
Yeah.
addition to that previous statement. With regards to building a playbook, I think it's really important that when you go into a new jurisdiction is first of all understanding what is the information that you have available at this moment at hand. So for example, if we look at Papaya service delivery from their perspective, we've got a very unique, I would say, a product which is called our knowledge base, where we have captured really from a legislative perspective and regulatory perspective all the first things you need to understand when you are talking about, I want to move into this new country, and we are looking at an employment headcount for payroll employees. We are looking at EOR workers. We are looking at engaging independent contractors. What are some of the things that we need to take into consideration from a cost point of view, from a statutory requirements perspective? When you're looking at global expansion, cost is becoming more and more a factor for both HR and finance to take into consideration. We are having conversations with clients, and I mean, yesterday I actually had a call on this where the client was seeking advice on if we are looking at, for example, Dutch-speaking consultants outside of the Netherlands, what are some of the territories that we should look at, and which of those territories would be most cost effective from a employment cost or from a IC engagement perspective? And I think that that type of data is really important, because as you are looking at global expansion, the first thing that you want to avoid is spending a lot of time in going into a jurisdiction that ultimately, from a budget perspective, is not going to be aligned with the requirements. And I think that really seeking that advice and understanding what are the local requirements, what are some of the hurdles in entering that market, and what are some of the options that we have. Is this a particular jurisdiction where, for example, EOR engagements are very easily facilitated, or are there other engagement models? And then also, what are some of the trends in that country that you need to take into consideration? One of the things that I'm seeing at the moment, let's take Poland as a prime example. You see that the demand from the local workforce in particular segments, let's take IT professionals, their demand is working in a more flexible environment. That might be freelance engagement, that might be independent contractor. You might be looking at jurisdictions where gig workers are rising. We see obviously that shift in the workforce. So also understanding how is your strategic approach to going into that jurisdiction aligned with what's the talent demand on the ground and putting those two together. And I think that Oki also had some experience with that from her perspective.
Really important point actually is that yes, absolutely, is understanding the market that you're moving into, and it's not just making assumptions that it's a lift and drop from what you've seen in other markets. So we've looked at it from the sort of macro, the organizational level. If we bring it down to the employee perspective, Anoiku, I think I'll come to you if that's okay. But how does having integrated HR and payments systems and strategies actually impact engagement, retention, trust? We've spoken about a few times. What impact have you seen directly at South Pole?
From an employee's perspective, if you look at the integrated HR payments strategy, it obviously impacts, and I think gives the first impression to create a relationship between the company and the employee. We often talk about right now the HR and finance pain points, challenge, and what is the benefit of the best in breed processes and platforms for them, but also it is for the employees as well, because it creates the transformation of the employee experience as a whole, and which primarily, since the beginning, as we said, building the trust, engagement, and then eventually improving the retention is possible by that. And on top of that, I was also thinking, like, from an employee perspective, having a good user-friendly platform, that tech savviness is also, I think it's a default now. It's not that you are using a tech savvy company, but you need to have it in place. And that is also, I think, one of the good parts if you have it in a sense. And if we start from the trust, employees trust faster erodes when there is issues with their pay. Like, that is the Maslow's basis, if you are not paying your employees on time correctly, then there is not much value in talking about development of engagements, in my opinion. You just have to do the basic first, then to build upon that. And when they are hired, they obviously trust the company to get the fundamental transactions right, pay on time, pay accurately. So that seamless and integrated system ensures that. And also, the moment they sign their contract, this flow of directness and accuracy of the payroll gives them the trust in that sense. So that is one important thing, and shows that they value and they operate in a professional way. So in a first sense, I think that is really important to build the trust with the employees. Then the engagement, you said, when the basics are handled flawlessly, employees then can focus on their jobs instead of worrying about the administrative headaches or to, try to connect and solve their problems from several systems and try to find that information, and which this removes obviously friction from day to day, and they focus on what they are really supposed to focus on. They don't have to chase different technologies or different people, but this technology reduces their stress and frees up the mental energy, and they can contribute more to more productive, value created tasks that they are supposed to. And ultimately, this trust and engagement are the cornerstones of retention, as we discussed. So these are the foundational elements of the employee needs to be handled precisely and with care, and also shows that the organization care for their people, value their people. It's important for them to have the seamless employee experience. So most of the time, we all know that employees stay with a company where they feel secure and have a positive and friction-free experience. So also, In the global context, people sometimes in different location can feel disconnected to the headquarters, for instance, and having a reliable, consistent system also gives them the feeling of valued as part of the same team or part of the HQ, regardless of where they are located. Because as I mentioned, I have people in Kenya, in Mozambique, in Switzerland, in Colombia, different time zone, different time spaces, but paid on time on the same day. So that is like a general sense, if you understand what you mean. So this overall creates, I think, the employee value proposition. And maybe to add on the perspective of HR and finance, we all talk about the friction and the different priorities, but actually these systems give the opportunity for collaboration. And as Alex mentioned, like you can trust the data that you are seeing. You don't have to trust your HR partner or question the data from HR or from finance, but you all see the same data and make smart decisions on this evidence-based decisions on these data. And also your teams can collaborate more on more valuable subjects and skill themselves instead of just putting in payroll data or updating HiBob employee data.
Understood. And just before we move on, Robert, Alex, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I think just one thing to solidify what Oki just said. One of the big four consultancies actually released a global workforce trend report. I think it was at the end of 2024. And this particular percentage was US based, but I think it's representative of probably, global figures. But it showed that 41% of employees would be more open to leaving their job or their assignment with a client after the first incorrect or delayed payment. So I think that really solidifies you want people to be focused on their main responsibilities. And if you have talent, specifically in markets where talent is very hard to attract and retain as it is, you really want to make sure that they're not distracted by ultimately transactional, but again, personal items like, am I worried about, is my pay slip correct? Am I getting the right amount? Is it going to be at the right time, etc. So I think that's, just wanted to add that.
Great. And Alex?
Yeah, I think I would echo the same points. Oku, I loved what you were sharing about that you have these people all around the world and they're getting the same experience. And I think that feels something that's really critical to be able to achieve through platforms, through our organizations, creating that feel, particularly in a world now where we are so global and it's becoming even more so, creating that sense of global consistency. I think that's something we at HiBob from a platform perspective are always thinking about, how can we have all these people around the world, but the onboarding experience feels the same and I'm collecting the information that I need to be able to onboard them into payroll and all of those types of things. But even from a company perspective ourselves, that's something we think about, like how can we create a philosophy for what parental leave looks like at HiBob, but so there's something globally around the world that everyone gets to experience that feels really similar and they feel like they're part of the same company. But actually, at a local perspective, it's being applied and it's compliant and everyone is being paid correctly. So I think the ability to be able to do that, to create the philosophy, the program as an organization and roll things out locally and have everyone having that consistency, I think is really important. And it goes beyond, like we were saying, it's relevant for what your paycheck says each month, or your first one is the most important, and but every month from there. And I think it goes beyond just expecting that your salary and your payments are going to be correct. It's like, what happens if you're on sick leave? What happens if you go on maternity leave? And you really want to feel confident that everything is being handled correctly.
And what that does, of course, is ultimately the bigger messaging here. And I think of this as a chief people officer myself, that this is all about building resilience. It's all about building sustainability. And if you're working for an organization that is scaling, you absolutely need that resilience and sustainability, because you simply cannot repeat the mistakes that so many companies have made so many times in the past.
Yeah.
let's finish, if you don't mind, by looking to the future. We've done a lot of reflecting and sort of where the workforce is today. Let's really look forward, and let's focus on how do we make workforce strategy future proof, if that's such a thing. And Alex, I'll come to you if that's okay, as you've got the floor. But I'm thinking specifically the metrics that best demonstrate progress towards building that agile, unified workforce strategy, specifically from a HR and finance perspective, of course. What do you look for as leading indicators?
Well, I think we've got some of the, I guess, more obvious metrics if we look at HR and finance. We've talked a lot about HR looking at engagement, retention.
Yes.
We've got things like internal mobility and how we're using the skills within our organization. And then from a finance lens, we've talked a lot about the cost, productivity, or ROI on some of these things. So I think the progress that we can see there is where these metrics really come together. So some of the direct or indirect costs that we see from retention, thinking about how can we connect the dots between finance and HR there.
How have you coped with that, particularly in such a scaling business, and when there's been conflict between the metrics, what finance are interested in versus what HR are interested in? How have you managed that, or how have you seen that managed over the period of that scaling?
I think I think really it all comes down to the partnership between the HR teams, the talent, I guess, for particularly for scaling companies and especially like HiBob, where we've grown very quickly. The connection and the partnership between our talent organization, our HR teams, our FP&A, I think really is so critical. And yeah, getting everyone on the same page. I think it goes back to a lot of what Robert was talking about when you're entering into new markets or trying to build the company and scale, thinking about like what is the priority for this location? What types of workers do we need to hire there? And do we need them to be in a hub, or can we have them working remotely? And how does that impact salaries and benefits and all of those kind of things? So I think, yeah, continuing to work on the partnership and having everybody in the same room and speaking the same language is super important.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And continuing that sort of forward look as well. I think HR, finance, perhaps have been guilty in the past in terms of almost feeling like we're playing catch up. Where are we behind? How do we get back to a level playing field and so on? Whereas, of course, what we ought to be doing is looking well beyond today. So, Robert, I'll come to you first if that's all right. And I'm particularly interested in sort of the future trends in integrated workforce payments technology that companies can be preparing for today. What are those emerging trends that you're seeing?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest shifts we are already starting to see is the payments on demand structure that is really determined by the change in the way that people engage work, right? And we've spoken about that a couple of times. And in some countries, employees are asking to access wages as they earn them. So kind of like earn as you go. That changes how HR and finance have to think about cash flow and workforce experience overall. If you look at the expenditure in terms of salaries on a P&L, that's often one of the larger, if not the largest cost. And it doesn't just sit with, okay, what's the monetary value that we pay out in terms of salary, wages, and contractor invoices, but ultimately it's about what is the overall cost and the way that you distribute that money across the globe. And I think that one of the trends that we are seeing at the moment is finance looking differently at, okay, what are some of the mechanisms that we can look at with our global payments providers to reduce the cost that we have for global workforce payments and increase some of the efficiencies and some of the levers that you can pull is obviously, for example, looking at how long do you fund salaries before payout, and if you can reduce that, what are some of the positive impacts on interests and capitalization of those funds. So those are really some of the conversations that we see the finance people are having in combination with HR, because HR is much closer to what is the demand from the professional workforce on the ground. Further to that is a trend really about crypto and stablecoin payments, and that's not very mainstream yet. I think 2 years ago, I haven't heard anyone asking, can I be paid in crypto or stable coin? But actually, in a conversation with our CPO earlier this week, our Chief Product Officer, even with our own environment within Papaya, he noticed that there were 3 people within our organization asking some of those questions. So you can really see that companies are exploring this. There's bigger demand on that part. Specifically where, for example, traditional banking routes are slow and expensive, and where the demand for this type of payment is increasing. That's an interesting topic of conversation. I think last but not least is really multi-currency flexibility for workers. We live in a time where we have digital nomads, freelancers, gig workers, and even payroll workers who are operating in an EOR domain, who are working in different countries for different amount of times, and they want to be sure that they can capture those funds in a safe and secure and compliant way, but also that they're able to distribute those funds to, for example, bank accounts in their home country where they're domiciled. And again, how do you support workers and finance from a tax regulatory perspective? So I think as we are looking at the future trends in workforce, it's all about what is the demand from the workforce in terms of payout flexibility, currency type, crypto, stablecoin, and also what is the speed, i.e. payment on demand, how quick and how often can you pay workers? And those are really some of the trends that I think specifically from a finance and HR perspective, both sides need to be aware of, because on the HR side, you're looking at how do we retain and attract talent that is demanding these type of things. And from a finance perspective, you want to make sure that you are ahead of the curve and have a mechanism in place where you execute on these payment requirements in the right way and probably in the most cost-effective way.
Yes. And just briefly, Alex, how are you preparing, or how is HiBob preparing for this?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's so interesting to see the crypto one is very interesting. I think it goes back to some of the conversation we had before about how we can create more of those opportunities for the processes that these 2 teams are involved in, particularly thinking about the people processes where actually the finance and HR collaboration is really important. So we're talking about workforce planning and strategy, and actually how can we have these teams more involved in those processes. I think maybe to add on to some of the trends that Robert was sharing, AI is going to be a huge driver of that as well. We've talked a lot about some of these manual processes, operational burden. I think AI is going to be a huge driver in how we improve some of those processes as well.
Yes. And Alex, just sticking with you, if that's okay, but why does it matter? Why does the partnership matter for HR in particular here? So, having HiBob and Papaya together, it doesn't just offer smoother operations today, but as we've discussed, it offers resilience against future workforce shifts like contingent growth, remote first, AI-driven processes. Why does that matter? Why does the partnership matter for HR?
I think it's critical. HR and finance partnership, it's super critical. We've talked about so many different business processes, which really, if we think about the workforce and whether that's employees or lots of the other types of engagements we have with people in our businesses, it's usually the biggest cost that we have as an organization across all of our organizations. So the impact of that, if we look at the HR side of that coin, I guess the retention of our teams, how we onboard them, our reputation, our brand, bringing all of those things in, there can be such a huge impact and such a huge cost impact. So I think that's where we can see some of the obvious connections between how these 2 teams can work, and the finance teams are really dealing with critical elements of our business, how we're making payments, how we're staying compliant around the world. So yeah, these two teams coming together is necessary.
Completely agree. And I think final question, if I may, and probably Oiku, that this is one for you, but when we think about global expansion, and especially as that accelerates, how should companies integrate things like sustainability and responsible growth practices into their workforce strategies? We've spoken a lot about compliance and making sure that payments align, perhaps now with ESG as well. So Oiku, from a South Pole perspective, it's all about sustainability. How do you weave this into your workforce strategy?
Obviously, this is a topic that is central to what we do in South Pole, and it's no longer enough for companies just to be profitable. And as you said, the intersection between the workforce strategy and sustainability becomes even more critically important when you are globally expanding, and this is accelerating tremendously. You must also demonstrate your growth in a responsible but also sustainable way. And to effectively integrate into this the company's workforce strategy, you have to recognize the S in the ECG, which is the social pillar, which is fundamentally about your people. And the compliance, the payment systems are not just administrative functions. It's like what we discussed. They are very powerful tools for demonstrating your commitment to social responsibility as well, because compliance is the foundation of ethical growth. And the first step is to treat the global compliance as a moral imperative and not just as a legal obligation, which we sometimes see it is the case. And by ensuring that your workforce systems are fully compliant with the local labor laws, tax regulations, social contributions, you are actually guaranteeing a fair labor practice, which is the part of the S in the ECG in the first place. And we discussed the payment pillar is needed for the trust for the employee, but also its direct reflection of the company's values, and integrating your HR and payment system ensures that every employee, no matter, as I mentioned, where they are in the world, is paid on time, accurately, in a transparent manner, which also builds the trust and shows that you respect the employees, your employees' financial well-beings too. And it is also a tangible way to demonstrate that you are committed to the social equity and fairness across your markets, which is the commitment you are actually giving. And on top of that, from a more pragmatic experience example, you also use the unified integrated system to provide data for your ECG reportings, because most of the time you need metrics, like if you are doing the fair wage standards, diversity metrics, local talents that you employed. As we discussed, the UE transparency, wage transparency is coming. So those are also, I think, very important opportunities that these really enables us and ultimately aligns our workforce technology with the ECG goals. And one thing on the last question, because it's stayed with me for some time, my general manager in Turkey, when I was working as an HR director, once told me that my HR head is my left wing, my finance head is my right wing. I'm coming from the business, I know the business, but if those two are not strong enough, I cannot function. And we discussed, I think we are being underestimated a little as HR, because you are actually responsible for at least 20% of the cost. And it's not revenue that needs to be generated, but you also need to be profiting in a sense where we are all cost conscious. It's like in our DNA right now. So I think that is more important, and especially what I see when the growing, scaling up companies fail is when the business leaders, when they are growing up, having the HR or finance strategy too late, that when you make them join to you, it's either they are just talent execution, hiring, or they are just doing the due diligence, but not having the basics, which when you grow up, it's kind of a little late to do that. So I think that's a learning that I have experienced in scaling up culture, but it's more to the business leaders instead of HR and finance. And obviously the systems that supports and HR and finance people also really makes it possible for these companies to be successful in the future, which we said, like, there are so many challenges, so we need to navigate somehow, and we need to have enabler supports providers to do that.
Completely agree. Thank you. Couldn't have said it better myself. Such a brilliant discussion. Thank you all. A few things that really stand out for me listening to the three of you is alignment between HR and finance isn't just operational, it's a real growth enabler. And the right technology choices like best of breed approach give both functions the data and the agility that they need. And I think most importantly, certainly for me, when payroll compliance and employee experience are handled so well, you do build that trust. And let's be honest, that's the foundation of any successful workforce strategy. Thank you, Oiku, Robert, and Alex, for sharing your insights today. And thanks to everyone for listening. I hope this gives you some inspiration and some practical steps to take back to your own organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
That was a great discussion. Special thanks to Dan for guiding today's conversation, and of course to Ogu, Robert, and Alex for their contributions. To our audience, thank you for your engagement and hope today's discussion has been insightful and enjoyable. For any unanswered questions, please rest assured we'll be reaching out to you via email in the coming days. Also, be sure to check your inbox for the recording of today's session, which will be arriving in the next couple of hours. Now, on behalf of HiBob and Papaya Global and all of us here at Connect Global Group, thank you for joining us today. Wishing you all a productive and wonderful rest of your day.